Mr. President, today is, like it was on Tuesday of this week, a very historical and significant day in the lives of the people of St. Lucia, particularly the lives of public servants and others who serve this country. Mr. President, I wish to take us back a couple months ago, or 3 months or so, when the Prime Minister in his budget address of 2021-2022 announced and made reference to the issue of good governance being improved in this country and accentuated the intolerance of corruption or malpractice, particularly among public officers, including politicians. Mr. President, there's always been talk and mention of that type of behavior for decades, for as long as we have existed as a country, as a civil community. And many times there have been accusations and conversations about who may have done what. But very often the public and citizens become very frustrated that the conversation is had, the debates take place, the accusations are made, but there seems to be no action to follow up and address the perceived acts of whether it be corruption or malpractice, particularly in public office. Mr. President, that conversation seemed to have become even more apparent in the last 5 years. And in some cases, it became a conversation that would be initiated by the average person on the street, not just those of us in public office, but the average St. Lucian that you speak to, almost suggesting that there needs to be some demonstration of intolerance actively set by those at the top, and in that regard they refer to the leaders of this country. Mr. President, I think we need to also appreciate the symptoms or consequences of perceived corruption. And I say perceived because sometimes there may not necessarily have been any convictions or any particular charges, but the perception of corruption can also be very harmful to any country. And that is why it can be a means or a method or one of those attributes that can destabilize a country's social and economic infrastructure. That is why, Mr. President, perceived corruption can diminish or can affect the trust that investors and legitimate business people may have in our country. Mr. President, one of the symptoms of perceived corruption or corruption itself is that it could cripple the social infrastructure. It can cripple the ability of others who wish to accumulate wealth used through the legitimate means. Mr. President, it is also true that perceived corruption can impede or can affect the potential for a country to attract investment, and even as we know, ease of doing business and corruption indices are factors that are variables that are considered by investors. And these can seriously affect our ability to attract that kind of necessary investment or investors. Mr. President, our ability to attract grants and financial support and other forms of support for all of the necessary initiatives that we would want to take, and the level of confidence in the external environment, the external partners in our country, diplomatic allies and friends who may want to take an interest in assisting us. Once there is perceived corruption, that is a red light. And so, Mr. President, it is important that as a country we demonstrate that we are committed to doing what we need to do to address these issues. One other thing that I think we can identify as a symptom of perceived corruption or corruption is that it does not encourage mobility and meritocracy, Mr. President. It is important that people in the public service who have worked hard to improve themselves, to equip themselves with the correct qualifications, competencies, and skills, can aspire to achieve upward mobility and not feel that they could be overtaken or disregarded or undermined in any way. And of course, it undermines the opinion of public servants when there is perceived corruption for what we consider due process. And so, Mr. President, this bill, the Special Prosecutor Bill, seeks to address that issue. It's a piece of legislation that will do a number of things, and I will attempt to just go through some of the various components, the objective of this bill, and why we are coming today to present it to this Honorable Senate. Why this bill, Mr. President? This bill has an intention, and the intention of this bill is not to make people uncomfortable, although I have noticed some might be, but it's really to demonstrate intolerance by this government and this country, along with its citizens, for any perceived actions or decisions that may have been quote-unquote corrupt. So, Mr. President, if we go to the first page of this bill, number 2, it reads, the purpose of this bill is to provide for the Special Prosecutor the investigation and prosecution of corrupt conduct of public officers and public officials, and for the appointment of the Special Prosecutor. Mr. President, that intention signals that this bill seeks to provide for somebody, of course a qualified, reputable, and competent legal mind, to be appointed for that particular purpose. Mr. President, if we go to page 7 of this bill, just to make a point here, and let's note that there is a page there that supersedes what was previously there. I hope that the Leader of Government Business has the information today. On section 4.1, it specifically refers to the bill not in any way being in conflict with the duties of what we consider one of the senior persons in public prosecution, the Director of Public Prosecution, the DPP of this country. And in 4.1, I just for clarification, it reads appointment of the Special Prosecutor, and in that regard it reads, the Judicial and Legal Services Commission shall, after consultation with the Attorney General, appoint an attorney at law as the Special Prosecutor. And so the Special Prosecutor's appointment, from the point of appointment, is done in consultation with the Director of Public Prosecution.
I think you meant the Attorney General.
Sorry, the Attorney General. Sorry, the Attorney General. Thank you, Mr. President. So, the AG is being consulted, and the bill, of course, does not take away or conflict the DPP. Now, Mr. President, there is a clear criteria outlined for the special prosecutor, and I wish to take you to page 8, on section 5 of the bill. That particular section, section 5 on page 8, explains who can and cannot qualify for to serve as a special prosecutor or the special prosecutor. And so a clear criteria is set out. And that criteria, Mr. President, includes someone, let me just read the introduction so it's clear. An attorney at law is disqualified from being the special prosecutor and is not eligible to be appointed the special prosecutor, or having been appointed, is not eligible to continue to be the special prosecutor if the attorney at law, now here are the conditions. Has filed for bankruptcy in court or in a court, or is declared by a court to be bankrupt. That's one of the conditions that eliminates you and makes you not eligible for being considered. B, is unable to discharge the functions of his or her office, whether arising from infirmity of body or mind or any other cause. C, is found to have committed professional misconduct under Section 35 of the Legal Professions Act, Cap 204. Another condition, D, is removed from the role under Section 29 of the Legal Prosecution Act, Cap 204. E, is convicted of a criminal offense, except if the offense, 1, is a minor traffic offense, or 2, is spent in accordance with the Criminal Records Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, Cap 313, or is a member of Parliament. Mr. President, all of these conditions are set to ensure that the special prosecutor is an independent person who the public can trust, who the system has proven to be clean, so to speak, and clear of all possible questionable issues with their character. And so the bill sets out to explain who can and cannot qualify. So it's not just anybody who can, at the whims and fancies of politicians can just be appointed. Mr. President, the bill also explains the functions of the special prosecutor. On page 8, under section 6, it explains what the special prosecutor is supposed to do. And so it says the functions of the special prosecutor are A, to receive a complaint of corrupt conduct from any person and investigate the corrupt conduct. B, to investigate corrupt conduct on his or her own motion. C, to institute a criminal prosecution or civil claim in any court against a public officer or a public official if the conduct of the public officer or public official appears to the special prosecutor on reasonable grounds to involve corrupt conduct. And D, to prosecute a criminal offense or civil claim instituted by him or her in court. And in addition, there are 2 others that I need to mention. To prosecute a criminal offense for corrupt conduct referred to him or her by the Director of Public Prosecutions, that's the DPP. So again, it shows that there is linkage and cooperation with the DPP. And F, to pursue, coordinate, and supervise civil recovery. Mr. President, the bill is very specific, not only as deciding or explaining who should and should not be, but also explains the function of the public prosecutor. Now, the idea of corrupt conduct sometimes is referred to in very vague terms. Very, very vague. And it sometimes can be misconstrued, because we must understand clearly when we say corrupt conduct, what exactly do we mean? And so I seek to indulge your attention here, get your attention here, Mr. President, and direct it to page 6 of the bill under section 1, because it is very important that we make it very clear to every party or everyone concerned what we mean or what is meant by corrupt conduct. Define it properly. And in this case, Mr. President, there is a proper explanation for corrupt conduct. And in this context, it means action by a public officer or public official that knowingly achieves for the public officer, public official, or for another person an undue advantage, and includes behavior specified in the schedule. So the idea of people deciding what for them is corrupt needs to be eliminated. It can't be a subjective view that you think this is corrupt today and this is not corrupt tomorrow, and people can, interpret it as they want. It's a legal process, so it has to be very clear as to what corrupt conduct is or is not. Mr. President, I can now draw your attention to section 8. And section 8 explains or deals with the powers of the special prosecutor. And the powers of the special prosecutor include a number of things. And I want to specifically refer to the first section 8.1, because I earlier made mention of the absence of conflict between that special prosecutor and the DPP. And in section 8.1, it says, subject to the powers of the Director of Public Prosecutions under section 73 of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 101, the special prosecutor may perform any function in relation to the institution, carrying on and withdrawal of a prosecution for an offense against the laws of St. Lucia, and may prosecute in a matter in his or her own name. So, Mr. President, this clearly indicates that the special prosecutor has specific powers, and the bill continues in sections 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 to give further detail about the specific powers that the special prosecutor has, and I am aware that all members in the Senate do have a copy and have had a lot of time to review. Now, Mr. President, the issue of, whether this bill is targeted at certain people or certain groups, I will leave that for another discussion. And all I'll say is, in that regard, if that is the perception, then let the chips fall where they may. There's a local Creole parlance that says, there are lots of other ways to say it, but those types of things. So it's not something where we want to make any assumptions. We believe that it applies to not only politicians, it applies to public servants. And so those of us who know that we are above board should be very comfortable and very relaxed, not only today, but for the rest of our careers. Mr. President, I need to also highlight a need, in addition to this particular piece of legislation, that we as a government, as a parliament, as a country, need to give a little more support generally to the strengthening of our institutions in this country, so that we can minimize the possibility of corrupt behavior being encouraged. So whereas this bill in itself seeks to deal with the special prosecutor to prosecute corruption, but as a country it's not enough to just have a bill but you must also seek to strengthen other institutions. And this is important because the stronger your institutions, the less reason you will need to have to do this. And I would hope the less work the special prosecutor will have to do. And so I speak to institutions such as the Office of the Director of Audit, the Integrity Commission. I am aware, Mr. President, that in the last government's term, we as an opposition had to, constantly remind them that they need to constitute and put in place an integrity commission. I remember filing a couple of times, and when I went to the office, there was nobody to give my documents to. And I was very concerned because I had to declare it's an obligation for me as a member of the Senate to have to declare my assets. And I did. I went through the various steps and did what I had to do. But when I had the documents, there was nowhere to collect it. And that for me was very sad. But this is not the case now, Mr. President. I'm very happy to say that right now the Integrity Commission office is functioning. And that I encourage all members of this Honorable House, Honorable Senate, to ensure that they make use of it and put the House in order by the deadlines that are always stipulated. So, Mr. President, I ask that and I encourage that these other institutions are made to function properly, thereby minimizing the need for us to be putting this in place. But at the moment, it is deemed to be necessary. Mr. President, I also want to say that as leaders, we must not only come to this House and put legislation in place and attempt to make sure that persons who are guilty are prosecuted. We have a duty and a responsibility as leaders of this nation, Mr. President, to lead from the front. We have to set the example. I've said it many times before under different circumstances. We have to talk the talk and walk the walk. Mr. President, it has to start with us. And I am very happy to inform this House that in the person of the Honorable Prime Minister, I have a very exemplary leader when it comes to that type of behavior. He has set the tone. And when I sit in his cabinet, I can tell you, I feel that he keeps his eyes very wide open, and he has made it very clear at every forum, he has made it very clear that he will not tolerate corruption among any of his cabinet members. He will not tolerate, and he has advised his cabinet members, he has advised all members of his party and his government to ensure that they too do not tolerate any form of corruption in the various offices, portfolios, and positions that they hold. So he leads by example, and he encourages his men and women and members of his team to do likewise. And so I believe I am standing here, Mr. President, as an example of someone who is led by a leader who is very clear in his mind and very clear among us that corruption will not be tolerated. And I want to applaud that, and I believe St. Lucians need also to know that the people who are telling them that they should not be corrupt, the people who are telling the public officers to be accountable, that they too start by themselves demonstrating that they will not stand for it. Mr. President, we must also develop a culture of intolerance as a country. Sometimes people have certain expectations of you because they believe that there are certain things that they can ask of you. And thankfully, some of us, certain people will not come to us to make certain requests. But if persons perceive you to be somebody who is likely to get involved in a corrupt act, they might approach you. And so, Mr. President, we must develop a culture where our citizens will not even think of approaching a public servant or a politician and even make a request for you to do anything that is not above board. We have to get to that stage in this country. It's not only for us to put legislation in place. We have to ourselves be comfortable that people will not even approach us and expect us to behave in a corrupt way. So, Mr. President, these are some of the additional thoughts that I think we need to add, and to ensure that the legislation is in place. It has to be. The special prosecutor is in place. We have to demonstrate to the country that this government is not only talking about corruption. We have to demonstrate to this country that this government is ready to deal with it if there is any act of corruption. And that they can trust us that we will get rid of that kind of behavior in any group, whether it is on one side or another side or in any sector of the public service. But for us to do that, Mr. President, we have to ensure that we take the necessary steps. There must be legislation, so we come to this House to approve legislation. There must be process, so we must appoint a prosecutor, a special prosecutor who is impartial, and there is a process to do so. And there's also a need for us to ensure that the institutions that already exist can provide support and can work along with the special prosecutor when it's necessary. We also want, as I said, to ensure that we encourage other institutions that are already dealing with that type of work to be strengthened so that they can be more effective. Because if we can minimize corruption at the very lower level, it will not permeate the other areas and get to the top. And finally, Mr. President, if we speak of eliminating corruption, we as leaders must demonstrate it in our own practices. We must give the people in this country the confidence that we are the first group who will, in our actions, demonstrate that we are intolerant and we are not involved ourselves. So, Mr. President, I hope that, there's one more thing I forgot and I need to mention. There's another very important entity in this country that needs to be part of this effort, and that is our religious organizations, our churches. They are supposed to be the institutions that encourage high moral and ethical standards. And I think we must ensure that in our deliberations, in our actions, that they get to play a role. I believe that they too, if they are on board and they understand the need for that they will help, as we know, it takes a village to raise a child. They will be part of that village that can ensure that the persons who enter the public service at the point of entry are already not persons who are inclined to engage in corrupt actions. And so I believe all of these players are very important and should play a role. So, Mr. President, I present this bill for consideration to this Honorable Senate. I anticipate a discussion that will be interesting, and I hope that members in their deliberations pay attention to the intention of the bill and that it will in fact achieve the objectives that it set out to in this case. I thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, this morning when we arrived and started the debate, I even thought that we would have had the opportunity to go through before we even broke for lunch. But I think the ensuing contributions have clearly demonstrated that there was great interest in this bill, and that every member of this chamber who spoke in some way or another demonstrated why this bill was so important. Even when there was critique and a bit of drama, what is clear to me at this point is that everyone seems to be very interested in this bill. The issue is there may be different reasons for some of the interest. So before I do my brief rebuttal, I want to thank every member for their contribution, and in some cases there was some elucidation and so some suggestions made, and I welcome them. I thank the members for their deliberations, and I believe that the intention is to ensure that the legislation is strong and serve its purpose. Mr. President, let me begin by, with regard to specific responses, reiterate a point that was made in this chamber. When the debate started, I got the impression that the opposition was challenging the government's intention to fulfill a campaign promise. I didn't respond because I was waiting to hear how the debate turned out. But I think by the time Senator Jawahir spoke, towards the end, there was consensus that, in fact, no one had tried to deny that. In fact, when any government or political party offers itself to the electorate and have offered, whether it is a manifesto or campaign slate, they do so by making or offering the electorate what it is that they want to present. And the electorate elects you based on these promises. And they expect you to fulfill that. So if your promise or your plans included a special prosecutor, it stands to reason that there is an expectation from the electorate that you deliver. And so we are not, like many other promises we made to the electorate. They elected us for that purpose. And there's nothing wrong if St. Lucians are saying, deliver that promise to us. That is why this government is in office. And that is why, after 1 year, we have taken our time. And there are reasons why, and Mr. President, when this bill has been passed and the actions of the special prosecutor begin, it is then that we will really know what this thing is going to do. Because it is very clear that the electorate voted this government in and gave it a mandate. And we will fulfill the mandate that the people have given us. So, Mr. President, let us not spray any gray area over the issue of whether this is one of our campaign promises. I think the answer has been very clear. Mr. President, to the leader of opposition business, his usual approach this morning, attempting to find, the weaknesses in the bill, which is his right, but in ways that I may have had to stand a couple times to deal with. He made a reference to us trying to find a way, to go after persons. Mr. President, there is no need to try to find any way to do anything. The special prosecutor bill explains the way to do things, and the way to do things will take a certain process. Mr. President, we will not engage in quickly going to get police officers to go to anybody's house to collect materials and do those kinds of things, and cannot account to the people for what the political electorate then did. We will not engage in that kind of behavior. We believe that it is proper to go through a process, enact legislation, and put something in place to deal with corruption. That is the approach we are going to take. So that model that I think he was trying to propose, we would like to say no thank you to that. Mr. President, for some reason today I have sensed a certain level of anxiety and nerve among the opposition members here. And I don't want to assume I know why. But I sat there and saw the leader of government business attempting to defend something that we know is, if there's such a word, indefensible, or it cannot be defended. Stood on his feet on a point of order to attempt to defend a fact. Something that his leader sat and acceded to, but then he'll come to the upper house to attempt to defend. And that is why we need to have a special prosecutor bill, because it seems that things that are glaringly obvious and true, there are politicians who attempt to make it seem as if it is not. So, Mr. President, enough said on that. Just to use the local Creole palace, isam Adam mam Kaisa la jodia Il some parole bon matin about special prosecutor. Il some parole sa commission some joine mettre. Il some qu'on nous a dit yon des bagailles tombé en jardin certains monde et puis yo vle sekli. Monsieur le Président, il some, as they say, I'll go back to the English, it looks like the cap has fitted the head of some people. And so I now understand all the anxiety and the excitement. There was a certain type of excitement on this side of the House that caused us to feel that there is optimism, and to some extent when the independent senator spoke, that there is some optimism in this country that this government is serious about rooting out corruption. But the excitement that came from this side of the House, it indeed was excitement, but I think it was a type of nervous excitement, a type of anxiety and apprehension. And if there is, as I just said, if there is nothing to be afraid of, what's all the excitement about? Why are you so worried about karma and who is going to be worried? What is that? Just if there is nothing to be worried about, let the bill pass and let the special prosecutor do his work or her work. And if nobody did anything wrong, then nobody will find themselves in any problems. As a teacher, Mr. President, sometimes when I wanted to catch the culprit in my class, you know, all experience, we have teachers here. You would just make a statement and watch and observe the reaction of the students, and you can almost know who did it. Just throw the thing there and just wait. And sometimes the one who jumps first and speaks loudest gives you a hint. What's? Oh, not me, sir. I didn't say it was you. I never said it was you. So not me. Also, I know who. So it's almost as if we're operating at that level where the first guilty party starts to speak first. This side, on this side of the House, this morning when I stood, Mr. President, I never accused anybody. Never. Throughout my entire explanation of the bill. But the leader of opposition stood up and tried to tell me that I accused him. He made himself the subject of a discussion that I had nothing to say about. So is that an example of not me also? So it's not me, it's this person? So I think, Mr. President, I am beginning to understand the reason why some of the colleagues in this honorable Senate are so very nervous. Mr. President, why is it that we have an issue with a government trying to legislate against corruption, when it is very clear that it is the mandate and the duty of the government to ensure that it's, as we call it earlier on, there is a term used, I think it's the PCI, the Perceived Corruption Index, in this country has deteriorated, particularly in the recent past. The figures are there, from 71% on a continuum of 0 to 100, where 0 is the worst case and 100 is the best case. From 71, which is more than 2/3, to 56%. That is a clear and obvious reason to be concerned. So even if nobody had been caught doing anything, on the international stage, there is a clear perception that something is going wrong in this country because our ratings in the corruption environment or in the world that looks at corruption is going downwards. And any government who is responsible, who wants its investors to keep coming, who wants the integrity of its country to remain intact, must take a step and do something about this. So I don't understand why this is making some people so uncomfortable. Mr. President, there was an argument, and sometimes when the members come here, they come with their written script, and no matter what happens, they're not going to deviate from the script. And there are certain terms that they must use. They must say it even if it's out of context. So I expected to hear the words, and it happened here, Mr. President. You know, you had to hear the utterance of Robert Linguist. You had to hear the utterance of the minister's account, and the name of the former Prime Minister, who is now, well, belatedly saw the light and left them stranded, strengthening our government. You had to hear his name, as if his government then was not a government of the United Workers' Party. As if at the time that that particular member was Prime Minister, that he was not Prime Minister of a government that was a UWP government. So when the members come to this Honorable Senate and they just throw the words out, throw them out, just say linguist, just say minister's account, just say the name of the former prime minister, as if it's going to have some effect. It has no connection to what's going on. And we know those tactics. The same way they would say Rochamel, just say Rochamel and say Grindberg. You know, just say it. And St. Lucians got upset. This is not working anymore. Haven't they realized that since 2016? It's not working anymore. Our country, people are beginning to be a lot more savvy and they can read through those things. Mr. President, I want to make some comments in response to some of the observations made by Senator Lee. Senator Lee started by thanking the government and acknowledging the need for us to have this legislation. And not only this piece, but legislation that is allowed to ventilate in the public domain and not coming to this Honorable House and Senate to have all three stages gone through. And I think this is true. And our government has deliberately tried to allow bills and other pieces of legislation to have to go through and be to get a certain level of scrutiny along in the public domain and to be looked at by various organizations that have an interest in the bills. And so we intend to continue that very practice. So I thank him for that observation, and I assure him that our government will try its very best, unless there are extenuating circumstances and urgent matters, to do the same with other bills. In fact, it has given an opportunity for the Chamber of Commerce, the legal fraternity, and other very important scrutineers to add their voice and their suggestions to strengthen the bill, and we welcome that. Mr. President, there was an issue that the leader of opposition business raised, but I think Senator Lee dealt with it, and that was the question of why the bill refers to public officers. I don't know why the leader of government business thinks that he can be a champion of the public servants. I don't know. I don't know what moral authority he certainly has. When he sat in a cabinet with people who verbally abuse public servants in public, just said things about them, called them names, and now he wants to champion the cause of public servants as if this bill is in some way going to hurt public servants. Do you really believe that the public servants in this country do not understand the implications of this bill, and that they really think that this government is going after them in any way? The majority of the public servants in this country, Mr. President, are law-abiding, ethical, good-standing citizens. They do their job. They do it well. I must say that St. Lucia is a place where almost all of our public servants do a great job. But we must not forget and not underestimate the fact that it only takes one or two to really spoil the whole show. And that is why you have to ensure that there is legislation. But I don't think that the leader of government business can convince any public servant that he can come and champion their cause. Today, there's enough reason why public servants will not see him as a champion of their cause. Let somebody else try to play that role, but not that particular member of the opposite side. Mr. President, I spoke about the index and how it has been interpreted. But there was mention by Senator Lee of the various other agencies that need to be strengthened, and he did mention the Integrity Commission. And I want to agree that when I first became a parliamentarian, first of all, I did say that there was no Integrity Commission. There was none. I had my documents, I filed, and I went, and there was nobody to give it to. Nobody. They told me it was in some Uranora house somewhere at VG. When I went there, there was no one. I had to go back home with it. But then, I can tell you that I have been able, subsequently, to not only have somewhere to submit it, albeit that we can improve the conditions and the staffing, but now I have somewhere I can submit it, and I was able to be issued with a certificate that says that I am in order, my business is in order. So at least we are improving, and I welcome the idea that we need to strengthen this. I have no problems with that. I wonder why, Mr. President, that the champion, the wannabe champion of the public servants now didn't see it fit to instruct or to advise his government to ensure that there is a public service and integrity commission. You had a cabinet of ministers that was supposed to file. Who were they filing to? You were not uncomfortable that there was no Public Service Commission? And today you want to champion the cause. Well, let's move on, Mr. President. The issue of the DPP, I want to take it in two chunks. One, I want to reassure this opposition that there is no way that this legislation is going to usurp the authority of the DPP, and I'll get back to that. But in response to Senator Lee, who made a very valid point about the backlog of cases that are currently before the DPP, I think anything that can help to relieve the DPP from some of that work should be a good thing for the DPP's office. So if the public prosecutor is going to take away some of that would have been DPP work, so to speak, I think it is going to be in the interest of the justice system to relieve to relieve the burden on the office of the DPP. And there's one other thing I think Senator Lee said that I think is true for any piece of legislation. He did mention the need for education. And that is a very important observation. You see, whenever there is legislation, especially new legislation, sometimes those of us inside here, we understand why we want to do what we want to do. But the average person out there who is not a legal person or does not understand the business or whatever area that the legislation speaks to may really not know exactly what the intention is. And I'll give you an example, Mr. President. There are some public servants and senior people, that is, and persons within the public service and even public officials who may not even recognize that some of what they do or they have done is actually an example of conflict of interest. And I'm speaking about genuine people who did not mean to do anything unscrupulous or wrong. They may not even be aware that certain actions that they have taken or decisions that they have made would constitute a breach in public trust or would be considered a conflict of interest. I remember in the teaching service when the Ministry of Education took a position where they would discourage spouses from working at the same school. So if you're a school principal, they would tell you that you should not recommend your wife to come to work at the same school. And I remember the response to that by teachers. I was a teacher then. I think I might have still been a teacher. I don't think I was a principal yet. I was a teacher. And people were resisting, but why can't my spouse work together with me? Because there was a time that it was okay. But when that move was made, there had to be education because there was an understanding that that couple, quote unquote, working in the same environment can lead to issues of conflict of interest and, can mix up things a little bit. And that was the thinking. So there are times when a public servant may not even realize, for example, that accepting a gift from a corporate business person may be ill-advised. Not declaring it. You take a trip and you meet a very, somebody who means well, not trying to bribe you or anything, and because of the value of the gift, you have to declare it, and you may have actually broken the law. So it is important that along with this legislation, I agree that there needs to be education so everybody understands what it is that constitutes corruption and conflict of interest. Although the relevant section of the bill that I referred to earlier, in some ways tries to explain and define what is corruption, but I think that observation makes sense, and education should be continuous in helping people understand what exactly can be constituted as corruption. Mr. President, a very popular discussion point this morning was the issue of what the Prime Minister, what all of us have said about our Prime Minister's position on corruption. And this thing about whether when the Prime Minister says that he doesn't want anyone, or he will not tolerate anybody in his cabinet being corrupt, that should be interpreted as a lack of trust. Mr. President, I wish the former Prime Minister had uttered that at least once in his entire tenure, whether it be public or privately. At least you would have known he said it. So maybe it's new to the opposition. They don't hear those things from their leader. But I'm very happy to see that every time our Prime Minister reminds us of that, that we benefit because we realize that it is something that he's serious about. And we will defend it. And we appreciate it as a man who cares about his cabinet members. And he cares about people. And he keeps them on the straight and narrow. Mr. President, the statement that all of you are the same statement, I think many of us mentioned that. I want to say, Mr. President, this is a perception that is very, very real. You see, sometimes there's what is real and what is perceived. I almost want to say that this is a real perception. I don't know if there's such a thing. Because there are many people out there who have that perception that once you enter the political arena, you are corrupt. I've been told that, Gibo, you know, they call me by that nickname. Gibo, Gassa, a guy like you, die for you. That will corrupt you. They are worried that because you have become a politician, that some way, somehow, you'll become contaminated. And this is a very dangerous perception in the minds of the public. We have to change this. We must do that. If we do not do that, Mr. President, who are the people that the political arena will attract? We want the political arena to attract honorable, reputable men and women of integrity. That is what we want. But if people believe that all of us should be painted with the same brush, then those of us who try to do the things that we are supposed to do, we are called names. I can't even tell you some of the names they'll call us. So, Mr. President, whatever the notion that, you know, we should accept this, we should change this. And this piece of legislation seeks to do that. It seeks to tell us that if people are corrupt, they do not belong in politics. That's what it's saying. And if they find that you are corrupt, whether you come from the government side or the opposition side, or you are past, a present, or a future politician, we are not going to tolerate it. That is what this bill is doing. And so, I don't know if the leader of government business understands past, present, and future, because I hear him saying it's too late. You can't be too late for the future, really. Mr. President, let me wrap up. Senator Jawa here made a point that I want to just add a few words to. And she said something during her presentation. I don't know if she recognized how powerful that was, but I want to put some emphasis on it. And she said that she believes this is the value, one of the values of this bill is that it will help us to uncover and to recover. And I thought that was very powerful. This piece of legislation will help us to uncover and recover. Now, I want to commend her for making that point, because for those of us who think that this is all about going after people and so on, can you imagine, Mr. President, if this bill were to allow us to uncover where some of our assets and monies of the state are, and that we can recover these monies, how much better off we will be as a country, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, just by way of example, and I remember when that example was mentioned, the leader of government business jumped out of his seat to stand on a point of order. As soon as the member mentioned the vaccines, he jumped up. Well, out of the $7.2 million, if this piece of legislation is going to allow us to uncover the balance of that money, and then hopefully recover whatever is left, it's something about over $5 million. Can you imagine what $5 million can do for us now? That is why this piece of legislation needs to be passed. Because if we can uncover and recover what corruption has cost us in this country, at least for the last 5 years, Mr. President, I think our next budget will probably have access to about $100 million or more dollars. Easily. So, Mr. President, I really do hope that this piece of legislation helps us in that regard. And this thing about a weapon, this thing I think Senator Stanislaus, I come to him now. Senator Stanislaus, I think he started really well. And I must thank him for playing the role of a QC. He gave me a really top lecture. I don't know if he was from the University of Birmingham, if the students inspired him this morning, but he gave me a top lecture in constitutional, on section 73 of the Constitution. And I sat there and I just listened and I'm a good student, I listened. And I said, wow, I should now refer to him as QC, Counsel QC, because he really did a number on that section 73. But Mr. President, you know what? While he was reading, I picked up my own copy of the Constitution, and I'm sure he saw me. And I followed page by page and section by section. After all that he said then he was really trying to make the point about this piece of legislation usurping the authority of the DPP. Mr. President, everything that he read is properly addressed in section 8 of this bill. So when he was finished, I just picked up the bill again and I went back to section 8 on the powers of the special prosecutor. So let me just tell him that I was very happy at his attempts to play lawyer today, avocati papi. But I was not impressed, because after he did all of that, here is what it says in section 8. Section 8:1, and may I quote, Mr. President, subject to the powers of the Director of Public Prosecutions under section 73 of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 101, the special prosecutor may perform any function in relation to the institution, carry on and withdrawal of a prosecution for an offense against the laws of St. Lucia, and may prosecute a matter in his or her own name. Mr. President, you know what part of that statement takes care of everything that the senator spent about 15 minutes reading from this Constitution? The first 3, 6, 7, 9, 10, the first 10 words in this section. And let me just read them, Mr. President. 8:1, subject to the powers of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Before anything else is done, it says subject to the... Now, I ain't going to play no lawyer now. I'm just playing a layman's account of what I see in front of me. So I'm not going to go and try to give any lecture on law. I think Senator Lee is better placed to do that. And he didn't try to do that. So all I see here is all of this lecture basically is addressed in the first 10 words in section 8:1. Subject to the powers of the Director of Public Prosecution. That already tells you where you're going. Nothing has started without the DPP. But then the lecture came, and so I must commend him for his effort. Maybe he should try law school as his next ambitious step. I like his spirit though, Mr. President. I like his spirit. So, Mr. President, one more thing. 2 days ago, and that shows you, if you listen to the discussion this morning, there are 5 senators sitting here, and I think if you listen to each of our presentations, we may not have said the same things, but I think we're speaking the same language. But then, you see, when and there's no script, we speak the same language without a script. But even when some people come with a script, they still are in contrast with what their leaders say. So let me give you the example, Mr. President. 2 days ago, the leader of opposition business, his leader, was attempting to give the lower house a lecture on why they should follow the model, and Jamaica is this and this is a good way to go and so on. All thing about Jamaica. But then he comes here a while ago and says that, not him, sorry, but his colleague, on his behalf, I suppose, Senator Stanislas, is saying that we should be creative and we should not follow what other jurisdictions do. And then when Senator Stanislas made that point, the leader of opposition business was, so Mr. President, I don't know what the position of the opposition is. What's their position on this? One thing I think they said that they support the bill. But then, here is, the opposition in the Senate saying the direct opposite of what the leader in the other chamber says. So, it's not for me to worry about. One thing I'll say to you, Mr. President, this government is very clear about its position on corruption. We are going to make every effort to stamp it out in this country, whether it is from this side, or any side. And we are not worried about who is going to get caca glue or who is going to point at who did what. This is not the point. This bill, the Special Prosecutor Bill, is here at this table today to be laid and to be passed to ensure that we address the matter of corruption in this country. And we will do so. And by the grace of God, after this bill is passed, the chips shall fall where they may. Mr. President, I look forward to the passage of this bill to be enacted as law, and to the actions and decisions that will be made thereafter. And I really do believe that it will make this country a better place. It will give us a better chance. It will make us less corrupt. It will keep us in check. And it will change the landscape, particularly the political and economic landscape of this country, for a long time to come. And so I give it my full blessings and look forward to its concurrence. I thank you, Mr. President.